Hi all, welcome back to the channel. So if you've been watching the channel, you'll know that last week we visited the operations and maintenance facility for the REM in Brossard and got a chance to actually view some of the first REM cars to arrive in Montreal. But what I wanted to do was kind of open it up so that if people had questions about the REM project or the REM cars specifically, they could ask it, and I do a Q&A specifically on that. So that's what this video is. So let me start answering some questions. So the first question is one that I think you could probably Google the answer to, but I'll answer it anyways. Will there be a stop at Montreal Trudeau International Airport and Montreal Central Station? Yes. The next question is, do you think the facilities are large enough to accommodate an extension to Chambly without the garage being expanded? I think probably not, because they have a certain amount of trains that they need to store. I think that the maintenance itself is probably large enough, but they would probably need more train storage. Fortunately, in Deux-Montagnes, there's actually a second operations and maintenance facility, which is quite large, according to the people at the REM project. And so what I can imagine happening, since that's in another area where it's probably actually more rural than the Brossard maintenance facility, they could probably add a few more storage tracks, and then I think it would probably be enough to accommodate that extension. What's your opinion on them using 1500 volt DC? They'll be one of the few systems to use it in North America. So I think that 1500 volt DC is fine. It's a metro system, so usually, at least traditionally in North America, we haven't used AC power for metro systems. Some systems around the world have, but given the fact that the trains are not gigantic, I think it's fine. At the end of the day, it's an engineering decision. It's not going to affect the passenger experience in any serious way, and so I think it's fine. The next question is, how was I able to visit the trains? The REM project reached out to various content creators, and I was one of the content creators they reached out to come see the project, so that's how. What was your first impression? I think my first impression was that they looked really glossy. They looked really glossy and shiny, and I think they look great, especially with all the bright lights around. Is there a possibility that the Ontario line will use rolling stock similar to the REM? Yeah, 100%. I think it's quite likely that the Ontario line will use rolling stock similar to the REM, and that's because Alstom is now going to be really big in North America with the fact that they are acquiring Bombardier. There's going to be some Alstom trains in Toronto on Finch West. There's already Alstom trains in Ottawa. While the performance has been questionable in Ottawa, at least it seemed to be that way, I think that hopefully the Metropolis does better on the REM project. And yeah, it's possible that we see them. There's no reason we wouldn't, but of course, it's also possible we see trains from Siemens or Hyundai Rotem or other manufacturers. What are the chances of the train having a satisfying door chime? I think they're pretty high, hopefully. The Montreal Metro obviously has a really satisfying door chime, at least in my opinion, and I think that given that legacy, they're likely to try to follow it up with something great. It is something I've asked before, and they basically said, like, it should be good. How spacious did it feel compared to Ottawa's LRT or Vancouver's SkyTrain? Well, compared to Ottawa's LRT, the trains felt much more spacious. Obviously, they're much wider. Same can be said for the kind of linear induction motor SkyTrain cars, so the Mark series, the Mark IIs, the Mark IIIs, the Mark Is as well. And even the Canada Line cars felt, to be honest, quite a bit smaller. The way the REM was just laid out, it was very open. It felt bright, like the new Canada Line cars, but since the seats were longitudinal, against the wall bench seating, it just leaves a lot more space for people to stand, which makes it feel a lot more spacious. And there was better kind of handholds. There was the kind of drop-down strap hanger handholds that you see in a lot of systems in Asia, and I really like those, and so I think it's good, it's spacious and nice. Based on your initial tour of the trains, how would you rank them compared to other rolling stock found in Canada? So I think that I would put it up with the Azure as my top pick. The Azure would be my top pick in winter when AC isn't relevant, and the Toronto Rocket is probably my top pick in summer when AC is relevant. I think the Toronto Rocket is a lot less attractive inside and outside than the Azure cars, which just feel way more modern. I think the REM cars have a lot of the really nice design of the Azure with the same width as the TTC subway cars. The only thing that I would say I don't like a ton about the REM stock is that they use the 2-unit kind of paradigm where they say they're gonna pair up units and run less trains off peak and then run longer trains on peak. I think that that's what a lot of systems seem to say, and then it often seems like they say they're gonna do that, but they usually end up keeping units paired up. So we'll see what happens, but yeah, I think that full-length 4-car trains would probably have been fine from day one, and then, you know, have the option to extend them to like 5-car trains in the future. That would have been my preference, but the trains themselves, really nice. Nicer than Toronto or Montreal's current trains, in my opinion. What's the best feature of this train, and what is the feature missing? So I honestly didn't feel like there was a feature that was particularly missing. The only thing that I found a little bit odd is that in the area where the bellows are between the two cars, these REM cars didn't have the covers that you see in Montreal and in Toronto. So in Montreal and Toronto, the bellows, so basically the part in the accordion joint between the cars, you can't actually see the kind of ribbing looked part. You just see a giant plastic piece that kind of bends and flexes. I quite like that because it just looks more refined, I guess, but these cars didn't have that, so I guess I would say that was missing. I'm kind of surprised because this plastic piece I'm referring to is something that a lot of new metro trains have. It's not like a huge deal, but it was intriguing that it was missing because Toronto and Montreal's new trains both had it. Do you think the provincial metro plans are too focused on the main city? We have a great link to Sydney in New South Wales, but the intra-city transit is a lot less solid. I think that focusing on cities is practical when you don't have a ton of transit. When you start having a lot of transit, then focusing on those intercity links makes sense, but as I've said in previous videos, the within-city public transit and rail networks are the low-hanging fruit. That's where you're going to get a lot of ridership, and so I think that that's why it's attractive. The next question is, why can't we have them? We can. Is it normal that the REM Metro car doors looked thin compared to regular Metro doors? I think they did maybe look a bit thin, but I think it's a kind of an optical illusion. These are plug-style doors, so they come out and then they slide across, and so I think that that's why they kind of look thin, but they're pretty standard, I think, in terms of thickness. Can you talk about the future expansion plans, and what do you think the most important ones are? Well, I'm not going to talk about it too much in this video. I think that the plans in Laval are very exciting, and I think that the South Shore getting a REM line instead of the tramway that was planned would also be really awesome. Go check out my Future of Montreal video for more on that. The next question is, do you think the inside layout, colors, finishes, etc. are better or worse than the Azure, SkyTrain, and Toronto Rocket? I honestly prefer the finishings to Toronto's trains, and I think they're on par with Montreal and Vancouver's. The LEDs and the look of everything I think is really nice. It's super modern, and it doesn't feel like overly industrial, which is how the Toronto Rocket feels to me. So that's how I feel. I kind of answered the seating layout question earlier. Next up is, what is their lifespan? It's been said that electric trains can pretty much last forever, and I think that the same can be said here. People will probably be sick of riding them, aka they're gonna kind of think they're old and grimy before that the actual trains totally break down, as long as they're maintained well and they're rebuilt here and there. So I think they'll last a long time, at least 30-ish years. The next question is, what do you think of having seats in plastic? I feel like they would be more slippery, especially since they're longitudinal. I think that's a reasonable concern to have, and I can agree in some systems where they have kind of plastic bench seating, like the New York subway, it can be a bit slippery, but because there's pretty deep dishes on the seats on the REM, I don't think it's going to be a big issue. Do you think the rolling stock is appropriate for this project? I think a lot of people are kind of freaking out because the seats are longitudinal and they're plastic, and this is a long distance system. The thing you have to realize is that the majority of trips are going to be, I think, around 40 minutes or less on the network. The trains operate faster than typical metro trains at 100 kilometers per hour, and the station spacing is very wide, so they'll actually be hitting that speed quite often. So I think that you know, for a 40-minute wait, it's not really a big deal. I mean, I personally have done lots of long rides in cities like New York with plastic seats, and I don't think it's a huge deal. Honestly, I think that when you're sitting in a seat and it's a transit vehicle where you're only on it for like less than an hour, which will be the case for most REM trips, as I mentioned, I don't think that the seat, even being plastic, is that big of a deal, because I just feel like when you're sitting in a seat, unless you're sitting in it for a long time, the comfort level doesn't become noticeable. Next up, was the Brossard maintenance facility completed when you visited, or even partially completed? Yeah, it was definitely partially completed. As you could see in the video, the buildings are up and stuff. It seems like there's a bit of work left to be done, but yeah, it's quite close to being finished completely, I think. What's the exact date of the train's opening? I don't know, because it hasn't been announced. Sometime in 2021. Do you think the Dorval station extension will happen? Most likely, I think it will happen, but it probably won't happen in like the first phase, because if it was going to, we'd probably have heard about it by now. English and French on trains. It must be new for Montreal. What are your thoughts on Montreal having bilingual info? Should it be done more? Canada has 2 official languages, so when possible, I think, especially in Quebec and Ontario, where there's quite a bit more crossover than, say, in Vancouver, I think having multiple languages makes sense. I think in general, if you can provide more languages without it becoming a hindrance, then you probably should. For example, in Vancouver, there's a significant Chinese population. I think a lot of the system could have Chinese language information as well, and it would probably help a lot of people. So I think depending on the region, you know, that should influence what languages you're using. I think it's good that Toronto is starting to use bilingual information on the Metrolinx projects, and I hope Montreal would start using bilingual information as well. To be honest, it's not a huge issue though, because in Montreal there are English language announcements if there's an emergency. It's just the like next station announcements which aren't English, and I think most people can figure out pretty quickly what prochain arrêt means. So I think it's good from an accessibility point of view, but I don't think it's like absolutely essential. So that looks like it for the questions. Thanks for asking them, guys. If you have any more questions, make sure to join the Discord and follow us on Instagram and Twitter, and feel free to ask us them there. Anyways, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.